Have you ever had someone threaten to drag you to court over something so petty? So ridiculously small that you couldn't even believe they were serious? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And the woman behind it all was none other than the notorious HOA Karen. This wasn't just a neighborly disagreement. No, this was the beginning of a showdown that would spiral way beyond anything I could have imagined, ending with her walking out of court completely humiliated. But before we get to that explosive finale, let me take you back to the very moment it all started. It was a warm Saturday morning, and I had just finished some yard work. Nothing major, just mowing the lawn, trimming the hedges, and setting out a couple of potted plants near my porch. I was feeling good, enjoying the peace of my weekend, when suddenly I heard the sharp click-clack of heels marching up my driveway. And there she was, Karen, arms crossed, sunglasses perched on her nose like she was the sheriff of the neighborhood. "Those plants are in violation of HOA regulations," she declared, without even so much as a hello. I blinked. "Excuse me? You heard me. Decorative plants need prior approval from the board. If you don't remove them immediately, I'll have no choice but to take legal action." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her stern expression told me otherwise. "Legal action? Over plants?" I asked, still in disbelief. "Yes," she snapped. "If you think I'm bluffing, I'll see you in court." Now, I've dealt with my fair share of neighborhood drama, but never had anyone threatened me with court over something this absurd. I tried reasoning with her, explaining that the pots weren't blocking anything, weren't offensive, and certainly weren't hurting anyone. But Karen wasn't having it. She doubled down, her voice rising so that even neighbors across the street peeked out their windows. The more she ranted, the more I realized this wasn't really about the plants. This was about control. Karen thrived on it, and the HOA gave her just enough power to feel like she ruled the entire block. I told her calmly, "Karen, if you think these plants are worth dragging me into court, go ahead. But just know, you're picking the wrong battle." Her lips curled into a smug grin, as though she had already won. With a dramatic turn, she stormed off, muttering something about teaching me a lesson. Little did she know, the lesson would be hers to learn. Because once I dug into the HOA rulebook, I found something that would turn the tables on her completely. This wasn't just about plants anymore. This was about standing up to a bully who thought she could weaponize the HOA, and I was ready for the fight. After Karen's dramatic threat, I'll admit, I spent the rest of the day annoyed. My peaceful weekend had been hijacked by the possibility of getting dragged into court over plants. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about her picking on me. If Karen could bully me into submission, what would stop her from targeting anyone else in the neighborhood? No, this wasn't something I could just ignore. So that evening, I sat down with a cup of coffee, grabbed the HOA rulebook, and began reading it like I was preparing for an exam. Let me tell you, those things aren't exactly light reading. The language was dry, technical, and packed with vague phrases that seemed deliberately confusing. But as I slogged through page after page, something interesting caught my eye. Nowhere, and I mean nowhere, did it say anything about decorative potted plants requiring pre-approval. There were rules about fences, about permanent structures, about painting your house neon green, but simple movable pots on a porch? Not a word. I highlighted the section and read it over 3 times, just to make sure. I wasn't missing anything. It was crystal clear. Karen was bluffing. Or worse, she was deliberately twisting the rules to scare me into compliance. But here's where things got really interesting. While digging through the fine print, I stumbled across something that Karen herself had overlooked. There was an entire subsection about abuse of authority by board members or representatives. It specifically stated that any HOA member who acted outside the scope of their role or misrepresented rules could face disciplinary action, including removal from their position. I couldn't believe it. Karen had just handed me the rope, and all I had to do was pull. The next day, I decided to test the waters. I walked outside, plants proudly displayed, and waited. Sure enough, Karen appeared within the hour, storming up the sidewalk like a detective arriving at a crime scene. "You still haven't removed them?" she barked. "Nope," I said calmly, "because I checked the rulebook. And guess what? There's nothing in there about potted plants needing approval." Her eyes widened for just a split second before she regained her composure. "You're misinterpreting the rules. I know what it says." But I didn't back down. I held up my highlighted copy. "Actually, Karen, I think you're the one misinterpreting things. And if you push this any further, you might find yourself in violation for misrepresenting the HOA's authority." For once, she didn't have a snappy comeback. She just huffed, spun on her heel, and stormed off. At that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't going to let this go quietly. And sure enough, the very next week, I got an official letter that escalated everything to a whole new level. It was a Tuesday evening when the envelope showed up in my mailbox. At first glance, it looked like any other piece of boring HOA mail. But as soon as I saw the bold letters at the top, Notice of Violation, I knew exactly who was behind it. I tore it open and scanned the contents. Sure enough, it was an official letter from the HOA claiming that my potted plants were unauthorized modifications and must be removed within 7 days to avoid fines and further legal action. I almost laughed out loud. The sheer pettiness of it was unbelievable. But what caught my attention wasn't the ridiculous claim, it was the signature at the bottom. Karen, she had signed off as if she alone was the HOA board. That was my smoking gun. Karen wasn't just threatening me in person. She was now forging authority in official HOA correspondence. And according to the very rulebook I had studied, that was a serious violation. Instead of panicking, I got to work. I photocopied the letter, highlighted the parts where Karen had overstepped, and compiled it with the section of the rulebook that spelled out abuse of authority. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to expose her. But I didn't stop there. I called a few of my neighbors, people I knew Karen had hassled in the past. One had been told his garden gnomes were visual pollution. Another was threatened for leaving his trash bins out an hour too long. A third neighbor had even been written up for parking slightly over the sidewalk. Karen had a long history of weaponizing the HOA against anyone who didn't fit her personal vision of perfection. When I explained what I had found in the rule book and showed them the letter she sent me, they were furious. Turns out I wasn't the only one fed up. We quickly agreed that if Karen wanted to take me to court, we'd be more than ready to show up with a mountain of evidence against her. But the best part? One of my neighbors had a friend who worked in real estate law. He offered to help me draft a response letter for free. Together, we wrote a firm but professional reply to the HOA, pointing out that there was no rule violation, that Karen's letter was unauthorized, and that if harassment continued, we'd be filing a complaint with the county. When I mailed that letter, I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't just standing up for myself, I was standing up for everyone Karen had pushed around. But as it turned out, instead of backing off, Karen doubled down, and the next step she took would drag both of us straight into a courtroom. The official court summons arrived 2 weeks later. My heart skipped a beat when I first saw it, because even though I knew I had the truth on my side, the thought of actually going to court over potted plants felt surreal. Still, Karen had crossed the line, and now it was time to settle this once and for all. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my binder full of evidence, the HOA rulebook, Karen's bogus violation letter, and written statements from several neighbors who had also been harassed by her. My attorney friend came along for moral support, which made me feel even more prepared. Karen, on the other hand, strutted in with her usual smug confidence. She wore a blazer 2 sizes too tight, clutched a stack of papers, and had this expression that screamed, "I've already won." She didn't even glance at me as she took her seat. When the judge entered, the room quieted. Karen was called to present her case first. She stood, cleared her throat, and launched into an over-the-top speech about preserving the community's beauty and upholding the standards of excellence. You'd think we were debating national security, not porch plants. She waved her papers around dramatically, claiming I had blatantly disregarded HOA guidelines. But as she spoke, I noticed something critical. Her evidence was just photos of my perfectly ordinary plants and a few printouts of random HOA regulations that had nothing to do with the issue. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I handed the judge a copy of the HOA rulebook with the relevant section highlighted. I pointed out that nowhere did it mention potted plants needing approval. Then, I slid over the violation letter Karen had sent me, with her signature at the bottom, and explained how it misrepresented HOA authority. The judge raised an eyebrow. So this letter was sent by a single board member, not the HOA as a whole? I nodded. Correct, Your Honor, and according to HOA bylaws, that action was unauthorized. Karen jumped up, her voice cracking. That's not true! I was acting on behalf of the board! But the judge wasn't buying it. Do you have documentation that authorizes you to issue violation letters independently? She froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. She shuffled her papers like she might magically find the proof. But there was nothing. The room was dead silent. You could practically hear the weight of her embarrassment pressing down on her. That's when the judge leaned forward and said, "It appears you may have overstepped your authority, ma'am." And just like that, the tables turned completely. The judge's words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Karen, who had strutted in with all the confidence in the world, suddenly looked like a balloon losing air. Her face flushed red, and she fumbled with her stack of papers, trying to salvage her case. Your Honor, she stammered, the plants, they disrupt the aesthetic of the neighborhood. That's what this is about! But the judge shook his head. This case is not about aesthetics. It's about whether the HOA bylaws were violated and whether this letter was sent with proper authority. He tapped the paper with Karen's signature on it. From what I see here, they were not. The room stayed tense for a moment. And then it happened. The judge dismissed the violation entirely. Just like that, it was over. My plants were cleared, and Karen's so-called case had collapsed before it even got off the ground. But the humiliation didn't stop there. The judge added, "Furthermore, this board member may need to be reviewed by the HOA for exceeding her authority. I recommend the association look into this matter." I glanced at Karen, and the look on her face was priceless. Gone was the smug superiority she always wore like armor. Instead, she looked like she wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. As court adjourned, I gathered my things calmly. Neighbors who had come to support me whispered excitedly, clearly enjoying the sight of Karen's downfall. Meanwhile, she bolted out of the room as quickly as she could, her heels clicking against the tile like gunshots of retreat. I walked out slower, steady, with the satisfaction of knowing that I hadn't just defended myself. I'd stood up for everyone who'd been targeted by her nonsense. The aftermath was just as sweet. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had happened in court. By the next HOA meeting, Karen's reputation was in tatters. The board held a vote, and while they didn't remove her outright, they stripped her of any ability to send violation letters on her own. Her reign of petty terror was over. And the best part? Neighbors who had once been too intimidated by her finally started speaking up. People decorated their porches, set out lawn ornaments, even added those garden gnomes Karen hated so much. It was like the whole community had been freed from her grip. As for me, every time I water my plants, I can't help but smile. Not just because they brighten up my porch, but because they remind me of the day Karen threatened me with court and walked out embarrassed instead. Sometimes the best way to beat a bully is to stand your ground, do your homework, and let the truth speak for itself. And in this case, the truth was louder than Karen could ever be.